Good morning. Denise Dryden here, doing my weekly Sunday morning video on all of the different things that we can approach individually in our relationships. And this is part of the energy coaching sort of changing the world stuff that I've been doing each week. So today I want to talk about flipping the conditioning. And so first we want to talk about, what do you know about conditioning? What do you think it is? What comes to mind when you think of being conditioned? First, when you wash your hair, you spend some time conditioning it, right? Or it's a training where you do a lot of conditioning and you get yourself physically fit. However, it is also, and I've got some notes here because I wanted to make sure that I said this right. It's the process of changing behavior modification by reward and punishment. And so conditioning, it associates pleasure or punishment with something that you do. And so, this goes back to Psych 101, right? You've got Pavlov's dog. The dog hits the button, the food comes down, and it's like, when I do this, I get good food. B.F. Skinner was doing spontaneous conditioning. How do you react and respond in a way that that increases the behavior that you desire. So this has been something that for 4 generations, over 100 years, we've been facing. So I think 4 generations, that means us, our children, so that's 2, our parents and our grandparents have all been part of this conditioning. So what I love to do is put some tarot cards up here. So this is the Osho Zen card for conditioning. It's what happens when you start to take on the persona of those around you, and you do what everyone else is doing so that you can fit in. And this little lioness is growing so fast that she's even strapped a sheep onto her back to try to blend in, right? It's what happens when we try to blend in. It doesn't really work, right? And we end up with a bunch of contradictions inside of ourselves, and we're trying to figure out, how come this doesn't really feel good? And when it doesn't feel good, what I noticed is that we start to experience some things when the inner part of us doesn't know who we are. Am I talking to me, or am I talking to my pretend me? Am I talking to her, or am I talking to him, or am I talking to my pretend him? This card's called projection. It's pretty interesting. This one, I thought, is what happens mentally when we start to carry the burdens of others. This person's all decked out, fancy clothes, everything, and the person carrying it's just being used, just being exhausted by that. The most common one that we experience is what happens when we're doing a lot of things in order to keep up with our culture, right? We're juggling 7 different candles up there, and even big, showing off and saying, I can even go up on a ball, I can play a trumpet, pay attention, and as we know, karma usually comes in and pops that ball down below, right? And what happens also is our willpower starts to get completely exhausted. It looks a lot like the machinations of the world are just taking over. This is what depression looks like. This is when you can't see what pathways are available to you. So when we're talking about conditioning, we're not talking about something that's light and easy. We're talking about what our culture has asked us to do, expects us to do, whether it comes through the initial public school model, whether it's about how we work, how we pay for taxes, how we save up for retirement, how we get a house, or we strive to get a house, or we feel like we need to provide. These are pieces of the conditioning that's come through the generations that are expectations. So these are known and unknown ways that we are affected. Makes sense, right? So conditioning starts at birth. It starts with our parents. It starts with our environment. It comes into words, hope, conditioning, expectations, right? We're shaped by, I remember sitting at the table, and my dad would, when he didn't like what we were doing, he was told he couldn't get mad by my mom, right? So he would just, and his cheek would do this thing. And, at that point, we knew that if we continued, that there would be punishment. So it's like cause and effect. cause and effect. So we're scanning and we're always looking externally to figure out what we need to do to change our behavior so that we don't get somebody who's mad, or we don't have somebody withhold or ask us to leave our job or do something like that, right? So we've been trained, and it's a visceral, dependent reaction to authority, to somebody who, and it starts in kindergarten and it goes all the way up through grade 12 and into the college years, which is when somebody in authority teaches us something, talks to us, asks us to sit down, our job is to say, yes, ma'am, yes, sir, or okay. And this is written right into the American Education Association when it was first founded. So we've been trained to respond how we feel, and sometimes it comes in fear, right? And so for the last 12 to 15 months, we've been in a lockdown. We've been separated from some of the social things that we like to do. And many of our environments have been dramatically changed, whether it's our ability to go to work or go to school or go to church or to gather, to go to to spend time with our office mates, restaurants, socialize. What have you noticed as you've been doing that? Some of us have missed it terribly. We've gone through withdrawal. Some of us have become very free and like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize what a pattern I was in. So when we take these last 12 to 15 months of sort of some new ideas, one of the good things that came out of the pandemic was sort of the separation from what we used to be expected to do, so to allow us to make some different choices. The second thing that happened was that over the last 18 to 20 years, we've seen an influx of these Gen Zers, and now the Alphas, I think they're 6 years and younger. And this generation, they have no built-in karma, no built-in conditioning. They do not adhere to the rest of the culture. So they have no ability to succumb to the many forms of our century-old conditionings. You're supposed to go to school. Why? You're supposed to get a GPA. Why? And it isn't rebellion. It is simply that they're watching us play this game on this track and they're going like, I'm not doing that. What makes you think I'm going to do that? And so they don't have the same fear response or the same motivators that we did, and they don't have somebody hanging over their head saying, we're going to punish you, we're going to shut you down if you don't do what we want to do. So we're dealing with a completely new generation that is not worried about these kinds of conditionings. This isn't what they do, right? So the older we are, the more conditioning we have, right? And it's usually external. And so we watch for these external cues of correctness. And those of us that are, I'm in my 60s. I'm a baby boomer. I went through this whole system. There are times when the phone rings and I think, what did I do wrong? It's a visceral response that, it takes so much attention to get out of our systems. Yet our children and our grandchildren are different. So they're here to shatter those conditions. And so I have some tips for you on how we're going to flip this, how we're going to get out of some of these visceral responses. Okay, so I've got 8 of them. So hang in there and stick to the end because I think these are really good. The first is to pay attention to the autopilot behavior that is within you. Like, oh my gosh, when you have to get up, what's your, what is it that you do? This is your schedule, right? What have you been doing? Do you get up in the morning? Do you go through these things? And so this is from your parents. This is from your environment. This is from your conditioning. These are the things you were taught. I have a system that is on autopilot. I really don't vary from it very often. I do specific things. I have chores on this day. I go to work. Fill it in. You know what your autopilot looks like, okay? So pay attention to when you're on autopilot. Number 2, imagine that you're on a train track, and I live right in this sweet little summer cabin right across from the railroad and right a block up from the lake. So I get to have all these sort of inspirational concepts. So think of a train track. It's when you get up, what you eat, what you wear, what you do each day. It's sort of like a scheduled clock, right? It's a scheduled mind. And, you know, where is it easy for you in that to deviate? What happens when you actually stop doing that and you try something different? And what happens, you know, to that sort of singular track that's going down, and you change your perspective? What does it feel like to you when you get to change something up? Are you nervous? Are you feeling like there's something wrong? Does it increase your anxiety? Does it bring you some energy, like, oh wow, I'm being really rebellious right now, right? So number 3, the stressors. When this external track is deviated, or when it's too busy, there's all these stressors. And so, you know, that's what we talked about here with this card, was that if there are too many things on this track, you just get worn down, and our body starts to push against that, and it starts to push against it. So watch your scheduling and overscheduling, because that means that there isn't a lot of room for you to breathe or take a space and break out, right? Number 4, so when we flip something, right? When we see it and we catch it and we drop it, or we put it down, or we stop, or we change direction, we are consciously making a subtle, maybe not so subtle, shift, right? So it's what happens when we consciously go, you know, I'm just not going to do that anymore. I'm not going to adhere to the dress code at work. I'm going to choose how many days a week I'm going to stay home, because I realize when I have really big projects to work on, it's easier for me to work from home. I have that choice. I'm going to make it. It's when you consciously choose to flip something and to deviate from what that autopilot or that expected you used to do. And number 5, be aware that when we flip a conditioned response, I'm not coming into work, today I'm going to change the way I'm going to go part-time, I'm going to encourage my children to look at a different kind of education system, I enjoyed homeschooling them, I think I want more of that, or my kids thrived on it. I didn't necessarily love it, but my kids loved it, right? Be aware that those around you are going to react. Of course they're going to react. They're going to be curious. They're going to be angry. It means that they have to shift also, because we're part of an organism, right? So you shift something, everybody else has to shift, and they may or may not want to. So there's a little bit of judgment. There might be friends, family, a lover, a colleague that'll step back and be like, what are you doing? You don't get to do that. And you go, well, actually, I do. And I'm realizing that I'm going to release some of these expectations or conditionings that I've been working with, right? Number 6, expect resistance, punishment, denial, silent treatment, because we have conditioned responses. We have teachers who are going to make a judgment. We have parents who have kids in public schools, when you choose to homeschool now, who are going to separate from you because you're not part of the group anymore. And so recognize that the reward punishment culture is so deep within us that you are going to have a reaction from somebody else. And so it is an individual job, right? And it was sort of like, I loved this Rumi card, which is beyond the threshold of fear. At some point you have to step past. What is it that I'm afraid of if I don't do this? What if I really step towards who I want to be? What would that look like, right? So number 7, pay attention to unconditional love. When you alter your path, your look, your intentions, your perspectives, do you still get love from others? Do you still feel love? Because love is all that really matters, right? And so that's where we shift it to that sovereign, and I loved this card, which is the Magician. And it's kind of like we are the sovereign being. And when we know that we're okay, no matter what, this is the magician who's in charge of all the elements, who's in charge of all the directions, who sits there and says, I get to create the world that I want, right? So what we do is, number 8, is we be love at all times, unconditional love. And we hold that within ourselves as a sovereign, because we hold the love in the world. And so part of the words that come in from, and I have 2 different cards showing you 2 different magicians, right? So the first one is her sitting on a lily pad. The second one here is the master with all the directions around them, which is I am separate, I am powerful, I am magical, and I create the world that I choose. So the only way we can create the world that we choose is if we realize that we have been conditioned through a fear response, through a cause and effect, through a punishment and reward system, and we can break that when we choose to. This is the kind of stuff I've been digging in and working with, teaching parents about kids that have no responses to these conditionings, working with relationships, individual relationships, as you individuate away from tracks that no longer serve you, that are too unhealthy for you. So if this is something you're interested in receiving more feedback, more information, or just want to talk, drop me a note. You can find me on my website at DeniseDrydenCoaching.com. Have a fabulous Sunday, and next week it's heat wave, so stay cool and get into some water if you can. Take care. Bye-bye.